Hello and welcome to my video. In this series of videos, I'm going to discuss delusional thoughts and paranoia. To introduce this series, I will discuss the case of a young woman who had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. I didn't know her very well. She was one of around 20 or so people where I worked. I can relate exactly what happened as I remember it vividly, even though the events happened about 50 years ago, because it made a huge impression on me. Her diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia was based on what psychiatrists call delusional thinking, or a thought disorder and accompanying paranoia. We all believed that she had a brain disease, which is what her psychiatrist had said. Most commonly, she complained that people were talking behind her back, wanting to do her harm. Of course, she had no evidence other than her intuition, her gut feeling. And there was no one around threatening her that any one of us ever saw. She was a quiet woman, well-spoken and well-dressed, but nonetheless most people kept their distance from her. There was, though, a small group of women, about 3 or 4 of them, who did associate with her and associated with her closely. These women had befriended her, claiming she needed friends, and they appeared to be her sympathisers and guardians, her protectors from the imaginary harm she feared. It turned out, though, that they were in fact her enemies, and in no way friends. One day, quite by accident, I found that her distress and paranoia of people talking behind her back and wanting to do her harm was well founded. In that job, we were allowed to work flexible hours. So often, in an extended lunch hour, I used to go for a swim. For convenience, I used to change in the women's locker room. The locker room was something like an L shape. The outer part of it had some tables and chairs for people to sit and chat and even have their lunch. You could go into one side and not be seen by the people on the other side, and even not heard if they were not paying careful attention. When I had gone into the toilets from the side, I heard laughing and chatting. But then, as I began to change, I became aware of what was being said, as the voices were loud enough and familiar enough. I was shocked. They said things like, she could be raped, and she could be injured, and she could even be killed, and would you go to her funeral? And all of these suggestions were followed by bursts of laughter. Ha ha ha. I recognised the voices as I knew them well. One was even the head of our department. They were no doubt talking about the woman with the schizophrenia, as they mentioned her name. These women were supposed to be her friends. I left as quickly and as quietly as I could, and rather than go for a swim, I looked around and found the woman with the schizophrenia. I was worried about talking to her, but I also had a very strong feeling that I should talk to her. She was in the corridor and seriously distressed. I took her aside and told her that I had something very important to tell her, but I wanted her to keep my confidence. She agreed and indeed kept her word. I assured her that she was right in thinking that there were people talking ill of her. Behind her back, there were people talking ill of her, and I had overheard them. I told her some of what I had overheard. I didn't have the heart to tell her everything, as some of it was truly horrid. I also told her who the women were. To my surprise, as soon as I had said what I said, she calmed down and had regained her balance. All the instability that was characteristic of her at such times evaporated. To help her stay calm, I said to her, "Look, don't worry, it's only talk," because at the time, that's what I thought that it was. And I added, "These women can't be your friends. They can't be. If they speak ill of you, if I were you, I would take distance from them." Later, when they were back in their respective workplaces, the schizophrenic woman confronted them. She told them that they had been overheard and that she now knew she wasn't crazy. She said it was her gut feeling and it was right. There were people talking behind her back and saying bad things about her. And she added, "I now know you are the ones. You're not my friend." They became angry, more especially in the coming days, as she must have gone and told a lot of other people in the department, because the department buzzed with people asking who told her, who told her. Also, in the coming days, their efforts had little or no effect. Obviously, they had been sensing her distress and were getting pleasure from sensing her pain and suffering. And now their fun was over. None of them showed any guilt for their actions. They had no remorse, not even a hint of remorse. Quite the opposite, in fact. People were told that somebody made it up. And then they told her that whoever told her all those things was lying to her and that they were innocent. She approached me and asked if I had really heard what I told her. I confirmed for her that I did, and she was satisfied that I had in fact told her the truth. I had heard they had been talking behind her back and saying very nasty things. It appeared that they needed her to be in the blind as to the truth of the situation in order to distress her. Once she knew the reality, she was no longer distressed. So they were unable to get the effect that they had previously. These women had enormous credibility in the workplace. They were trusted and looked up to as exemplary good people. No one would have believed them to be inhumane or psychopathic. Since those times, I have come to understand that I had only seen a vague sketch of the true picture. My thoughts over the years, as I wondered about the matter, were, sure, we have intuition and can have a gut feeling that something is wrong, but how can it cause someone that much distress? This question remained with me, and that is one reason why I remembered this matter well. So when my late psychopathic husband had come out of the closet and was talking about the ways in which the inhumane operate, I asked him about this matter. He told me that a concealed threat is used, as it is in all foul game play, to make the target fearful. And I discussed that in my video series on the underlying conditions of disease, the first 6 basic videos. This means that at the same time as the woman perceived the ideas, she would have felt fear. As there was seemingly related fear, she would have believed the ideas, considered them real. Thus, the ideas become beliefs. And of course, in not being able to see the danger she was facing, not able to know what to do to protect herself, one can then understand her distress. But even then, I didn't fully appreciate what my late husband was saying at the time. In more recent years, in discussing this subject with others, I had some more recollections which had given me more perspective as they coloured in the picture my late husband had given. What I remembered was there was, from time to time, a visitor waiting in the office of the woman who was the overseer of our department. Now I began to appreciate that this woman was possibly the main culprit, and that this man that was waiting there in her office was possibly part of the game. I and others had seen this man several times in her office, but no one saw anything suspicious. And of course, if he's not there to threaten anyone else, no one else is going to have any bad gut feeling. Once when I went into her office to deliver a report, I took a second look at him. He immediately moved to ask me if I knew when Mrs. X would be back in her office, because he said he had something very important to tell her and he was in a hurry. He had to be somewhere else. His reasons and the look of concern on his face alleviated any suspicions I might have had, and my main concern was, should I leave an important report on her desk when there's a stranger in her office? I hadn't really questioned him as being someone not trustworthy as such, so I had not seen anything amiss. I left the report on her desk. I never asked my late husband about the visitor and his question because I had not remembered him at that time. But on many occasions I had asked, what about if someone becomes suspicious? My husband had said, oh, you just use some cue to put them off. Some cue? I asked. And then my husband added with an air of innocence, say something that gives you credibility, engenders trust. And then, as I looked at him bewildered because he was so callous, he leaned forward and said, we give them a bum steer. Outraged by his callousness, I had said, and of course with no conscience. Conscience! He laughed. He nearly fell off his chair laughing. When he regained his composure, he said, the reason we are effective in putting someone off is because we have no stupid conscience. Now, about this man in the office. What happened in the office when I took a second look could well have been a cue to put me off. He asked a question that seemed like he had credibility. And if he had no conscience, then that would account for why I didn't detect any problem. I saw nothing amiss. That brings a lot of suspicion, at least, on this man. Now, he may not have been the concealed threat. Of course, it could have been someone else, but there had to have been somebody involved, unseen or seen and not suspected, because you can't pose a concealed threat without somebody that would do a crime if they were given a go-ahead instruction, which of course is 5 rings and then stop. A phone call that doesn't even have to be answered. When we know about the foul game play, and only when we know we have knowledge of the foul game play, we see a number of red flags here. The first one, the office, is Mrs. X's office. The second red flag is that Mrs. X is involved in foul game play. That is 100% certain, because shortly after I had heard all those hateful suggestions, I found the woman with the schizophrenia and I saw that she was extremely distressed. She said people talking behind her back wanting to do her harm. So there has to be a concealed threat. The third red flag is that, of course, being in her office, he was near a phone. Now we have 2 more red flags, and they're big red flags. First of all, this man was seen many times and always when Mrs. X was absent. No one, to my knowledge at least, ever saw him in the office when Mrs. X was there. Now, the other red flag is that Mrs. X never told the staff who he was. There were occasions where people had said to her, including myself, there was a man waiting in your office while you were out. And her reply to everyone was, yes, I know, I've dealt with that, thank you. And that was it. She never gave anybody any information. Now, this is important because we were working in a laboratory where, to some extent, security was important. We really did need to know if there was someone that was not authorised to be in the building, or at least not part of the work, so that we could be aware if there was some problem. Whichever way we look at it, there was foul gameplay. So the suggestions that were made were not arbitrary at all. They had the very means by which those suggestions could be carried out. A serious crime could be committed. And yet, at the same time, appearances belied the reality. We can't suspect every stranger, and more especially when they appear ordinary and behave in an ordinary fashion. It is this that is exploited, and exploited to the hilt by the inhumane. And to hurt another person, they have to be inhumane and related in some way. They have to get close to them and be trusted particularly. Everything can be made to appear ordinary, because criminal intent is the key ingredient. And that is mental, it's not physical. The third party is not privy to the person's interpersonal environment. Unable to discern criminal intent, they depend upon the appearances. Look, everything looks normal, what are you worried about? This lack of evidence was the key ingredient that was used to diagnose her as delusional and paranoid. So what is happening here is that the psychiatrist is diagnosing somebody as mentally ill with supposed chemical imbalances in the brain for no other reason than being aware that there is a problem in their surroundings. A lot of areas need further discussion. It would be better to make another video to discuss all these points further. Thank you for viewing my video. And here is a goanna in my yard eating some chicken.